Have you ever heard the creak of a floorboard at night, when the house is supposed to be silent? Or felt a cold gust of air, even though all the windows are closed? They say fear lives in the mind, but sometimes it feels like fear has a form, lurking, waiting, watching. In many homes across Latin America, this fear has a name, El Coco. For generations, this creature has been the shadow that slips into bedtime stories and the whisper that keeps children awake. Parents invoke its name not as a joke, but as a warning. Behave or El Coco will come for you. It's not just a tale to scare misbehaving children, it's a thread woven deeply into the fabric of our culture, a legend passed down from lips trembling with both fear and fascination. Tonight, we'll explore the chilling story of El Coco. But first, let me ask you, do you believe in the power of a story to hold more truth than it seems? By the end of this tale, you might not look at the dark corners of your room the same way again. Before we dive deeper, let me take a moment to remind you. If you enjoy uncovering the mysteries of the unknown, stories that send chills down your spine, and legends that blur the line between reality and nightmare, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. Your support helps keep these stories alive and ensures you never miss a journey into the shadows. Now let's return to El Coco. Imagine a quiet village in the heart of Latin America. The sun has set, casting the world into a tapestry of shadows and faint moonlight. Inside a modest home, a mother warns her child for the last time, "Go to bed or El Coco will come." Her tone is firm, but her eyes betray a flicker of unease. She has heard stories she doesn't share with her little one. Stories that are too close, too real. El Coco is not a monster you see coming. It doesn't roar or chase. Instead, it waits. It listens for the cries of a stubborn child or the defiance of a mischievous one. It's said that El Coco can seep into the cracks of a home, unnoticed until it's too late. Some say it appears as a shapeless shadow, while others describe it as a hunched figure with hollow eyes that seem to pierce through the dark. But what truly makes El Coco terrifying is not its form, it's the unknown. No one can agree on what happens to those it takes. Some say it carries children to a faraway land, where their cries echo forever. Others whisper that it steals their very souls, leaving behind an eerie silence that even the wind refuses to disturb. The legend has traveled across borders, taking on different shapes and names, but its essence remains the same. Whether it's El Chuchuy in Mexico, El Coco in Central America, or Coco Man in the Caribbean, the warning is universal. Beware the disobedient child, for the shadows have ears. What makes El Coco endure through the centuries? Is it just a tool for parents to enforce discipline, or is there something more sinister lurking behind the stories? Many who grew up with the legend speak of strange occurrences, missing children, unexplainable sounds at night, or fleeting shadows that vanish when you turn to look. Perhaps El Coco is more than a tale. Perhaps it's a reflection of our primal fear, the fear of the dark, of the unseen, of losing those we love to forces we cannot understand. And perhaps, just perhaps, El Coco is watching. As we continue, keep one question in mind. If you were told not to look under your bed tonight, would you obey? Stay with me as we unravel the mystery, because the truth behind El Coco might be closer than you think. I was 6 years old the first time I heard the name El Coco. It was a humid summer evening, the kind where the air felt heavy and still, and the only sound was the occasional chirp of crickets outside the window. My grandmother, a woman with silver hair tied neatly in a bun and a voice that could silence a room, leaned close as she tucked me into bed. "Be good," she said, her words soft but edged with warning. "And don't leave your bed tonight. If you do, El Coco might hear you." I froze. Who's El Coco? Her eyes darkened as she glanced toward the doorway, as if expecting to see something, or someone, lurking in the shadows. El Coco is the one who comes for naughty children. He waits for them to disobey, to wander where they shouldn't, and then he takes them away. No one ever sees them again. The way she spoke sent a chill down my spine. But I was 6, and my world was small, filled with toys and bedtime stories, none of which had prepared me for this. "Is he real?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached out and smoothed the blanket over my chest. "Just be a good boy and you'll never have to find out." And then she left, leaving the door open just a crack. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind outside felt magnified. My imagination ran wild, painting vivid pictures of a shadowy figure creeping toward me. I wanted to believe it was just a story, a scare tactic to keep me in line. But there was something about the way my grandmother had spoken, the fear in her voice, that made me question whether she had seen something she couldn't explain. The next morning, I brought it up at breakfast. My parents laughed, brushing it off as an old wives' tale. My older brother, though, leaned in with a smirk. "Oh, El Coco is real," he said, his voice dripping with mock seriousness. "He hides under the bed and grabs your ankles if you get up at night." I shot him a glare, trying to hide the shiver that ran down my spine. "You're lying." "Am I?" he teased, his grin widening. For a while, I convinced myself that he was just trying to scare me. After all, what was El Coco but a bedtime boogeyman? Something parents invented to keep kids obedient. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it didn't take much to water it. As the weeks passed, I began hearing more about El Coco. At school, other kids shared their own versions of the legend. One claimed her cousin had seen El Coco as a dark, shapeless figure standing in the corner of his room. Another swore her uncle had disappeared as a child, only to reappear years later, unable to speak and with a faraway look in his eyes. Each story was different, but they all carried the same chilling warning. El Coco wasn't something to take lightly. I tried to push it out of my mind, but it lingered. Every time I stayed up late or misbehaved, I half expected to hear the scrape of claws against my window or the soft whisper of my name from under the bed. Looking back, I realize how much that fear shaped my childhood. It wasn't just about El Coco. It was about the unknown, the possibility that there might be truths lurking in the stories we're too quick to dismiss. And now, as I share this with you, I can't help but wonder, was my grandmother trying to protect me, or did she know something she couldn't bring herself to say? Because sometimes the things we fear most are the ones we don't dare name. It happened on a night that seemed made for nightmares. The kind of night where the sky is a swirling mass of dark clouds, and the wind howls like a lost soul searching for something it will never find. I was 11 years old, no longer a little kid, and I thought myself too old to be afraid of shadows and stories. But some nights don't care how brave you think you are. Our house, an old, creaky structure at the edge of town, always had its fair share of strange noises. Settling wood, groaning pipes, the occasional scampering of something in the attic. I had grown used to them. But that night, as a storm raged outside, those familiar sounds took on an entirely different tone. The rain battered the windows like desperate fingers, and the wind snuck through every crack it could find, whispering secrets I didn't want to hear. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The power had gone out hours ago, leaving the house steeped in shadows that danced with every flash of lightning. And then I heard it. At first, it was just a faint creak like the weight of something, or someone, on the floorboards outside my room. My heart thumped loudly in my chest, and I told myself it was just the house. Old houses make noises. That's all it was. But then came another sound, closer this time, a low, almost imperceptible dragging noise, like fabric or claws scraping against wood. I froze. "Mom?" I called out, my voice trembling in the darkness. No response. Lightning illuminated the room for a brief second, and in that flash, I could have sworn I saw the edge of a shadow move across my doorway. It wasn't the kind of shadow cast by a tree swaying in the wind. It was solid, deliberate, alive. I pulled the blanket up to my chin, my mind racing. The stories of El Coco flooded back to me, unbidden. It couldn't be real, could it? I told myself to stay calm, to think logically, but logic doesn't stand a chance when you're 11 and alone in the dark. The scraping sound grew louder, and with it came a faint, rhythmic tapping, like fingernails against the wall. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying it would stop, but the moment I did, I heard my name. It wasn't a shout or a whisper. It was somewhere in between, a guttural, almost inhuman sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Juan?" My breath caught in my throat. I had never heard my name spoken like that before, as though it were being dragged out of someone's mouth against their will. Summoning every ounce of courage I had, I peeked out from under the blanket. The hallway beyond my open door was pitch black, but there was movement, an unnatural, undulating motion that didn't belong to any person or animal. Another flash of lightning lit up the hallway, and for a brief moment, I saw it. A hunched figure, its body too thin and its limbs too long, crouched at the far end of the hall. Its eyes, if you could call them that, glowed faintly like embers smoldering in the dark. It didn't lunge or move closer. It just stood there watching me. And then the power came back. The lights flickered on and the hallway was empty. The air felt different, lighter, as if whatever had been there had vanished the moment the darkness retreated. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even move until the sun rose, its golden light chasing away the terrors of the night. To this day I can't explain what I saw. Maybe it was a trick of the mind, born of too many stories and a stormy night. Or maybe the stories of El Coco aren't stories at all. All I know is that something was there that night, and it was real enough to leave me questioning what truly hides in the shadows. That night remains etched in my memory, a lingering shadow I can never quite shake. It wasn't just a bad dream or a figment of my imagination. It was something far more unsettling. It started with a sound. I was 14, old enough to think I had left childhood fears behind, but not so old that I didn't still feel a shiver when the wind howled outside my window. It was late, well past midnight, and the house was deathly quiet except for the faint ticking of the old clock in the hallway. Then came the knock. It wasn't loud, more like a gentle tapping, as if someone, or something, was trying not to be heard. It came from the direction of my window, which faced the backyard where the tall oak trees swayed ominously in the wind. My first thought was the branches. It had to be the branches. But then the knocking moved. It was at the door. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at the thin crack of light at the bottom of the door. Shadows danced there, flickering like a flame, but the source of the movement wasn't clear. I told myself to stay calm. Perhaps it was my parents checking on me or my older brother playing a prank. But then the door handle turned. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, the metal handle began to twist, the faint creak cutting through the silence like a blade. I sat frozen, unable to move, my breath caught in my throat. One. The voice was raspy, almost inhuman, like the sound of dry leaves being crushed underfoot. It called my name again, softer this time, but unmistakably directed at me. My instincts screamed to run, to bolt out of the room, but where could I go? The voice was between me and the only exit. Instead, I did the only thing I could think of. I pulled the blanket over my head as though it could shield me from whatever was out there. That's when the air changed. It became heavier, colder, pressing against my chest like an invisible weight. The room filled with a faint, acrid smell, like burnt wood and decay. And then I heard it, the sound of breathing, slow and deliberate, coming from just beyond the door. I peeked out from under the blanket, unable to stop myself. The door was ajar now, just enough to reveal a sliver of the hallway beyond. And in that sliver I saw it. A figure crouched low to the ground, its body distorted and unnatural. Its limbs were too long, its back arched like a predator ready to pounce. The faint glow of its eyes pierced the darkness, two orbs of dull, flickering light that seemed to burn straight into my soul. It didn't move, just stared. The seconds stretched into an eternity as I locked eyes with whatever it was. My mind raced, screaming at me to close my eyes, to look away, but I couldn't. And then it began to crawl. Its movements were slow and deliberate, each motion accompanied by the soft scrape of its claws against the wooden floor. As it inched closer, the air grew colder still, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck rise. Just as it reached the threshold of my room, the house was suddenly bathed in light. The hallway bulb flickered to life, and with it, the figure vanished as if it had been nothing more than a trick of the darkness. I bolted out of bed, throwing the door open, but the hallway was empty. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs. Was it El Coco? Or was it something my mind conjured from years of hearing those chilling tales? I don't know. But that night, I learned something I would never forget. Sometimes the things we fear in the dark aren't just stories. They're waiting, watching. And if you're not careful, they might just let you see them. The morning after the encounter felt unreal, like stepping into a world that had subtly shifted overnight. The sunlight streaming through the windows seemed too bright, too warm, a stark contrast to the icy terror that had gripped me just hours before. But no amount of sunlight could chase away the lingering unease. I didn't speak of what I'd seen, not at first. What could I even say? That I'd seen a creature straight out of a legend meant to scare children into obedience? It sounded absurd even to me. So, I carried the weight of that night silently, hoping the memory would fade like a bad dream. But it didn't. Every creak of the floor, every whisper of wind against the windows felt amplified. I started sleeping with the light on, the door locked, and my blanket clutched tightly around me as if it could shield me from whatever was out there. My parents noticed, of course. My mother, in particular, grew concerned when she saw the dark circles under my eyes from sleepless nights. "What's wrong, Mijo?" she asked one morning over breakfast, her voice laced with worry. I hesitated, the words catching in my throat. Could I tell her the truth? Would she believe me? Finally, I mumbled something about having a bad dream, and she nodded knowingly. "Ah, you've been listening to too many of Abuela's stories," she said, giving me a reassuring smile. "There's no El Coco Juanito. It's just a tale to keep kids in line." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to brush it off as a figment of my imagination, fueled by the stormy night and my overactive mind. But then small things started happening around the house, things I couldn't ignore. My younger sister, Sophia, began waking up crying in the middle of the night, saying she'd heard someone calling her name. My father dismissed it as bad dreams, but I knew better. The shadows in the hallway seemed darker than they should have been, lingering in corners even during the day. And once, while I was alone in the house, I swore I heard that same faint rhythmic tapping on the walls. It wasn't just me. The air in the house felt heavier, charged with an energy that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. Even our dog Luna started acting strange, barking at empty doorways and refusing to enter certain rooms. I finally broke my silence one evening when my grandmother came to visit. She had always been the keeper of our family stories, the one who first told me about El Coco. When I described what I had seen, she didn't laugh or dismiss me. Instead, her face grew serious and she crossed herself. "You must be careful," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "El Coco is not just a story, Juan. It is a warning. Sometimes when people stop believing, he shows himself to remind us he's still there." Her words sent a chill down my spine. Was that what had happened? Had I been foolish to brush off the legend as mere superstition? The weeks that followed were a blur of heightened anxiety and sleepless nights. My parents, unaware of the truth, tried to reassure me that everything was fine. But deep down I knew better. To this day, I can't say for certain what I experienced that night. Was it truly El Coco, or was it something my mind conjured in the darkness? The logical part of me wants to believe the latter, but there are moments, late at night, when the house is quiet and the shadows seem to stretch too far, when I feel it again. The weight, the cold, the presence. And in those moments, I remember my grandmother's words. He is still there. I've learned to live with the uncertainty, though it hasn't been easy. The story of that night has spread among my family, whispered at gatherings and passed down as a cautionary tale. Some laugh it off as a child's imagination run wild, while others glance nervously at the shadows as if expecting something to emerge. But I'll never laugh, because whether it was real or not, I know one thing for sure. Some stories stay with you, and some shadows never truly fade. Legends have a way of outliving their origins, carrying whispers of the past into the present. El Coco is one such legend, a shadowy figure that transcends borders, languages, and generations. To understand the full weight of my experience, we must delve into the roots of El Coco and the hold it has on the collective imagination of Latin America. The tale of El Coco, or the Boogeyman, is deeply woven into the fabric of Latin American culture. While the specifics vary from one country to another, the essence remains hauntingly similar. El Coco is often described as a dark, shapeless figure, a creature that lurks in the shadows, watching, waiting. In some stories, he is faceless, his true form obscured, making him more terrifying because he could be anyone, or anything. For centuries, parents across Latin America have invoked the name of El Coco as a cautionary tale. Misbehaving children were warned, "If you don't behave, El Coco will come for you." The threat was enough to silence defiant cries, to send shivers down the spines of little ones who dared to stay out past sunset. But El Coco is more than just a tool for discipline. His story carries deeper cultural significance. In a region shaped by a history of hardship, conquest, and resilience, El Coco serves as a reminder of the unseen dangers that lurk in the world, both real and imagined. In Mexico, El Coco is often called El Chuchuy, and his legend takes on a slightly different tone. He's portrayed as a small, goblin-like creature with glowing red eyes, hiding under beds or in closets. Meanwhile, in Chile, he's known as El Viejo del Saco, the old man with the bag, a sinister figure said to carry away disobedient children in his sack. In Argentina, the legend shifts yet again, with El Coco being less of a creature and more of an ominous spirit that preys on fear itself. The variations are endless, but they all share a common thread. El Coco thrives on fear. And fear, as we know, is universal. What makes El Coco so enduring is the way his story adapts to fit the times. In the past, he represented the dangers of wandering too far from home or disobeying family rules. Today, in a world dominated by technology and endless distractions, his presence serves as a reminder of the darker forces that can pull us away from our loved ones and our values. But El Coco isn't just about fear, he's about control. He is a symbol of the unknown, of the things we can't fully understand or predict. And in that way, he becomes a reflection of our deepest anxieties. There's also a psychological aspect to the legend. Folklorists suggest that stories like El Coco help communities process collective fears. By giving a name and a face, or the lack of one, to their fears, people can confront them, albeit in the safety of a tale told around the fire or at bedtime. The persistence of El Coco in popular culture speaks to his power. He appears in literature, music, and even modern cinema. His name is whispered in homes, joked about in schools, and, occasionally, etched into the nightmares of those who believe they've glimpsed him. For me, the legend of El Coco is no longer just a story. It's an experience, a memory, and a mystery that continues to haunt me. Whether he is a physical being, a spirit, or merely a product of imagination, his presence is real in the minds of those who fear him. And perhaps that is why El Coco remains so compelling. He is not bound by time or place. He evolves with us, lurking in the dark corners of our consciousness, waiting for the moment when our guard is down. So, the next time you hear a creak in the hallway or see a shadow move in the corner of your eye, ask yourself, is it just your imagination or is it something more? After all, El Coco isn't just a legend. He's a reminder that some fears never truly disappear. They simply change form, waiting for the right moment to return. Legends like El Coco rarely fade. They remain like a faint whisper in the wind, an ever-present shadow at the edge of the light. As I bring this story to a close, I can't help but reflect on the question that's haunted me for years. Was it really him? Was it truly El Coco? Looking back, the rational side of me wants to dismiss it all as a vivid childhood imagination fueled by fear and local folklore. Maybe it was just an overactive mind interpreting the creaks of an old house, the rustle of wind against the windows, or the tricks that shadows play on sleepless nights. After all, that's what most people would believe. It's what we tell ourselves to push away the things we don't understand. But deep down, there's a part of me that isn't so sure. I still remember that night in terrifying detail, the oppressive silence after the strange sound stopped, the way the air seemed unnaturally cold, and the feeling of being watched even when I was completely alone. Those sensations don't just vanish. They cling to you, lurking in the back of your mind, waiting to resurface in moments of vulnerability. Over the years, I've tried to bury those memories. I moved on with my life, told myself it was all in my head. But every now and then, something will happen to stir up the old fear. A faint noise in the middle of the night. A shadow in the corner of my vision. A chill that seems to come out of nowhere. And in those moments, the legend of El Coco feels all too real again. What's more unsettling is the reaction from others when I've shared my story. Most people laugh nervously or brush it off as just a tale, but a few, those who grew up with the same legend, don't dismiss it so easily. They nod, their eyes darkened by their own memories. They've heard the same whispers, felt the same unease. What makes El Coco so terrifying isn't just the story itself, but the possibility that he could be real. That somewhere in the unseen spaces of our world, he waits. For centuries, his legend has thrived on fear, and fear has a way of giving life to the things we least want to face. So, do I believe in El Coco? I don't know. What I do know is that I've felt something unexplainable, something that doesn't fit neatly into the box of rational explanation. And maybe that's the true power of El Coco. He doesn't need to be real to make us question what we see, to feel the chill of something unexplainable, to wonder if the stories we grew up with are more than just tales. And perhaps that's his greatest trick. He doesn't have to show himself fully. He only needs to make you doubt, to make you glance over your shoulder or hesitate before turning off the lights. As I share this story with you now, I can't help but ask, what do you think? Do legends like El Coco have some basis in reality, or are they just products of our imagination? But before you answer, I'll leave you with this. The next time you hear an unexplained sound in the dead of night, the next time a shadow seems to move just out of your sight, remember El Coco. Because whether he's real or not, one thing is certain. His story has the power to linger long after the telling is done. And in the quiet moments when you're alone and the house is still, you might find yourself wondering, just like I do, is he watching?